You've identified 244 companies that are making insufficient progress integrating climate risk into their business models. We took voting action against 53.
Yes. This is Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock Investing, the largest money manager in the world.
Many companies have not moved forward. How they're navigating around this whole long-term trend of climate change.
But
Climate inaction putting companies on watch? But it's not just Fink and his large single investment firm. The globe's biggest banks and financial institutions are all in on this as well. Thanks to the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, thanks Obama,
de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
A new financial chokehold on American businesses has already begun. If business owners, both big and small, refuse to bend the knee to the Great Reset overlords, well then, honestly, good luck surviving. They'll squeeze those businesses until they can't breathe anymore. And it will affect you in your daily life. Tonight, I'm going to show you how the banks plan to skirt the Constitution and deny you your rights. Because this isn't some far-off, distant plan being concocted by the UN anymore. This is here. The oligarchy is taking control. Tonight, Operation Choke Point 2.0, the climate credit score system.
Hello, America. I'm not going to say that you should completely disregard the news of the day, but you kind of should, because it's amazing the amount of things that are being missed. In 99, I said New York would be bombed and Osama bin Laden's name would be on it, and I was called nuts. I said the caliphate. First, 2008. 2006, I was saying, these banks are going to collapse. This doesn't work. 2008. For 2 years, I was called crazy. Then the caliphate, I was called crazy. I mean, this is a pattern with me. But I've always been in a position where I've told you these are the things to come. And if we don't change now, they will happen. What I'm going to show you tonight is already here. It is already happening. We end up looking like China in the end. I've told you before that there's really 3 steps. There's suggest, there's shove, and then there's shoot. They're going to suggest things, and if you don't do it, then they're going to start shoving you. And then in the end, if you can't get everybody to do what you want, totalitarian governments just shoot them. We're at the end of shove, as you will see tonight. I want to show you a story from 2018 that I don't remember seeing anywhere. Merrill Lynch, which is owned by Bank of America, announced something called ESG Scores, or Environment, Social, and Governance Scores. Quote, knowledge is power, and we want our self-directed clients to know as much as possible when building and managing their portfolios to help them pursue their investing goals. Well, isn't that nice? I mean, that's great. They want to make sure that you adhere to a certain set of unknown guidelines. Now, it reads here in 2018 as if they're just trying to help you meet your goals. But as it turns out, if you don't meet the guidelines that are being prepared, you should prepare being on a blacklist. Oh, you invest in old fossil fuels? Lower social score for you. How much electricity do you use? We might have to boycott you. You're not still employing so many white people, are you? Blacklist. Think of the irony on that one. It sounds a little freaky. It sounds far-fetched. I don't remember seeing anything like this from the past in my bank. So was this just all mumbo-jumbo? Was this virtue signaling? Was this really just trying to help you? Was it just a thing to appease the left and show how woke they all were? Or was it pointing to something even much more scary than that, and something we all missed because we were paying attention to the anarchists and the Marxists? I have to apologize to you. We do have a problem with Marxism in America, but they're useful idiots. They're being used by what is being created. We were recently given this screenshot from somebody that has assets at Merrill Lynch. They now have been assigned an ESG score. Their score is 4.7 out of 10. Now, that's not good. Imagine if you got an email from your bank or insurance company or maybe even your employee with a new score, but it was a credit score. And your credit score, you had a perfect 800, but now your credit score says 360. You'd be like, what? Would you be able to get that mortgage? Would you be able to buy that car? Could you start your business? Would you get a loan? Would you get a credit card? That's what the ESG score is. Something clearly began happening in 2018, and then it was triggered over the past few months. Now, most of us, including me, missed this coming. From 2017 up until today, the left has kept us blind and asleep, keeping us focused on Trump, 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 Russia, Ukraine, whatever it was. But it was an all-out onslaught of misinformation and, more importantly, misdirection. We are not battling Marxists. In fact, when you fully understand the Great Reset, you are going to realize that a lot of those people on the left that are in the streets are going to become your ally because they're going to get screwed too. What is it that they're building? Well, last week I showed you this chalkboard, and it's a new oligarchy that is being built. Going green is only one of the levers to build the new world order. I told you last week that these are funnels, and what these funnels are, social justice, they play on people's emotions. Don't you want to stop racism? Of course we do. And it gets more and more authoritarian as it comes this direction. The same thing with climate change. Don't you want to save the earth? Of course I do. And it becomes more and more authoritarian as you get closer to the center. And the reason why is because there is pressure from the corporations, the NGOs, the public-private partnerships, and the government. Tonight, I'm going to fill in a couple of things. The Fed and the big banks. The Fed is not part of the government. It's the 5 biggest banks in America. The Fed and the big banks, the pressure coming down, and the FDIC, Treasury, and SEC now pushing up. I'm going to show you the government's collusion with our banks to fundamentally change society as we know it. But it's not coming from the government. I'm also going to show you this. I'm going to show you who said this later in the show, but I want you to look at this quote. We will promote social justice policies to reduce inequalities, including through support to tax, redistributive and domestic resource optimization approaches, social safety nets, and/or insurance schemes. Who said that? Social justice, redistribution of wealth? It had to be Bernie Sanders or some Hollywood actor or Greta Thunberg, right? No. This was said by American bankers. You see, can't even say the left in this because this isn't a leftist thing. This is an oligarchy. This is people who just want power and money, and they've been following money. They've been following your money. And we're about to be choked into compliance. I truly believe this is something that has been in the works for over a decade now. I don't know how long. The framework was established long ago, surprise, surprise, under the Obama administration. And I used the word choke earlier, and I did it for a reason. That's not the word I chose. Obama chose that word. I'm going to show you something. This is from Forbes magazine. Please don't take my word for anything. Please do your own homework. The FDIC under Obama was operating something called Operation Choke Point back in 2013. I had never heard of it. It was an effort to, quote, freeze politically disfavored businesses out of the financial system. Are you kidding me? So if you had a business that wasn't politically correct, didn't adhere to the political grand designs, the FDIC, like an attack dog, a government institution, would then exert pressure on that bank to drop your business. Your business would be deemed high risk, and then it would be locked out of the financial system. One particular bank noted that in actuality, these businesses, and I quote, posed no significant risk to the financial future, reputation, and legal risk. Yet they still terminated the banking relationship. Now, let me reiterate that. The banks said at the time, these businesses did nothing wrong, they did nothing embarrassing, they did nothing illegal. Nothing. But Obama was putting them out of business regardless. He was using the financial system to do an end run around the Constitution and to set the framework for a new public-private oligarchy. Why isn't this everywhere? Why don't we talk about this? It can't just be conservatives that care about this. You see, this was all about redistribution of wealth, not from the top 1% down, but from the bottom and middle to a select few at the top. The politicians, the CEOs, they would rule as overlords. This is something their clever marketing never included. No. But it's all about having the rich pay their fair share and help the poor, right? Yeah, I don't think so. Let me start in the past here and give you a couple of things before we get fully to this chalkboard. Remember, before 2010, we still have a lot of these things, but some of them have fallen out of favor. We had lobbyists. We still have that. That's corporations giving money and trying to influence the government. Then you had the carbon credit system. Remember when that fell apart? Whatever happened to that? Buying carbon credits. Well, who lost in that? It wasn't necessarily you. You'd pay the price when you went to buy a product, but it was the corporations that were buying those carbon credits. That went away. Agenda 21, that went away. Boycotts, they really learned how to boycott back in the early 2000s. The Tides Foundation came into its own. It packed America's boardrooms with leftists. You had Common Core. Common Core was all about training our kids to work for a corporation. And then, of course, you had the subprime lending, which led to the collapse of the banks because the government was telling the banks they had to do this in order to keep their license. Well, that collapsed, and then the banks were bailed out, but you weren't. A few years later, Barack Obama did Operation Choke Point, and it was being prepped to go global. So much centers around this, something that we've all kind of joked about and never paid attention to, the Paris Agreement. We don't pay attention to it because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But the Paris Climate Agenda was the great reset before COVID came along and gifted them their ultimate excuse. Let me show you. Joe Biden's current climate envoy, John Kerry, he was the agreement's chief negotiator, famously showing up to the signing with his granddaughter on his lap, because it's all for the children. Now, if that's true, why were they trying to hide the results from the models that we're now trying to emulate? Well, let me show you. The Germans were the first to begin this new green oligarchy. It wasn't working out very well. In fact, in 2013, at the time of the Operation Choke Point, 2 years before the climate agreement in Paris, there was an article from ABC that was actually written by a German outlet. Quote, "How electricity became a luxury good." Everything was going wind and solar, and no one could afford their electric bills anymore. It was spreading all over Europe. In the UK, it was predicted that electric bills would soon cost more than people's mortgages. Now, I haven't seen that anywhere. Do you hear that from Biden, Kerry, AOC, anybody? In Europe, they're calling it a fuel poverty crisis. In England, 3,000 people die every year because they can't afford to turn the heat on. 3,000 people? We don't hear that. It's insanity. And no one in the mainstream media is telling you any of this. Why? What's really going on? Well, we're in a time similar to the end of the Cold War in Eastern Europe. And then the Soviet Union fell in the 1990s. At the end of the Cold War, Russians were they had overspent. It was a mess. And the government collapsed. And then the heads of the government, in fact, a KGB officer, Vladimir Putin, he rose to the top along with business people, and they became the oligarchs of that country. The future was in partnerships that they could create to lord over industry and dominate society, and they could get rich while everybody else still ate potatoes. That is the modern-day Russia and the modern-day China. The Paris Climate Agreement in 2015 was the equivalent of 1992 Russia. You see, going green is the modern-day gold rush. None of us dispute that fossil fuels someday will look like steam or pack mule-fueled wagons. Wind and solar and batteries cannot pull their weight today, but the future is a different conversation. The technology isn't there yet, but we're being pushed like it is. What is that about? Follow the money and who ultimately controls the Benjamins. Climate change and going green is a $1.5 trillion business and growing. Look at Al Gore. When he left office, his assets were less than $2 million. Then he went bonkers on climate change. He started making a few investments in green initiatives, and poof, man, he was a good investor. He's now estimated to be worth over $100 million. But Al Gore's not alone here. He's just the punching bag because he's easy. They're all doing it. Joe Biden made an announcement that he would replace the entire federal fleet, over 640,000 cars, with electric cars. Now, I'm sure that was a completely secret decision. Nobody knew about that. But man, Nancy Pelosi was lucky because just a couple of weeks before this was announced, she put $1 million into Tesla. What a coincidence. How about our new climate envoy, John Kerry? Is he profiting off it? Well, we don't know. The World Economic Forum hosted him, and he urged business leaders to invest in green jobs. His current investments haven't been disclosed, but back in 2013, the last time he was required to disclose them, he didn't seem all that green. In fact, if you scroll through his asset disclosure, you'll find 24 oil and gas companies. Really? From the new climate envoy? What was he thinking? Well, maybe the fact that the Arab Spring was raging in the Middle East and North Africa and oil was over $100 a barrel. Maybe that's what it was. But Pelosi, and really all of them, the rest of them, they represent the richest members of Congress. They know exactly what they're doing here. They're following the money and the power, whether it's from oil and gas at one time or green the next. It's about controlling the money and exerting control of this new world order through a public-private partnership or a global oligarchy. This is our future if we don't stop it, and we warned about this decades ago.
Someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism. And what is fascism? Fascism is private ownership, private enterprise, but total government control and regulation.
That's where we're headed. It's an amazing thing. Now, nobody's had the charisma nor the balls to call this out anymore, but this is probably the most dangerous time we have ever been with the fundamental transformation of our country right at our doorstep. And the big guns are here, the banks, and they are being turned against you. I don't care if you're left or right, Republican or Democrat, they will be turned against you. Operation Choke Point 2.0 is here, and you'll understand it next. American financing. Homeowners have quite an opportunity in front of them right now. You can save more money when you need it most, and I think you'll understand why I've been saying recently, please do this now. It's going to get harder and harder to get a loan. Simply by refinancing your mortgage, you could save a lot of money, and you need to. If you consolidate and put your credit card loans into your mortgage without resetting the term of the loan, it could save you hundreds, if not $1,000 or more a month. So learn about custom loan programs from American Financing. American Financing, this is a locally owned group that started as a family. They're still a family-owned group, but they serve everybody from coast to coast. No games with these guys. They listen, they're fans of the show, and and they'll treat you right. Call them today to learn more. Find out how much you can save. You'll be glad you did. Call them now, 800-906-2440, 800-906-2440, or AmericanFinancing.net. All right, so who was actually following the Paris Climate Agreement back in 2015? I mean, I did a little bit, but I didn't look into it. I was talking about the usual junk at the time. Saving the planet, immediate spontaneous combustion is happening, blah, 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 blah. But the moment that Donald Trump descended that escalator, pretty much all the media attention went in that direction. There was hardly any critical analysis of the scarcely disclosed side details, and that's where the devil resides. The Paris Agreement was not about cutting back on fossil fuels as much as it was about the redistribution of wealth and permanently altering the global financial system. Check this out from the fine print in Article 2, 1C of the Paris Agreement. Mandates country parties to make financial flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. Wait a minute. So if we want to go green, we have to alter our banks? How did we miss this? Oh, that's right. Trump. Russia. Trump. Who can afford to alter their business models around vague rules regarding the environment and social justice that seem to be changing daily? Well, I'll tell you who. The big banks and the big corporations that keep getting bailed out from the Fed, which is the 5 biggest banks in America. They can afford to absorb the losses and make the transition. You? No. They're too big to fail. You're screwed. In fact, this is what they think of you and your business. Watch.
Of course, large businesses like Amazon and McDonald's, for example, can and perhaps should pay more. But I'm wondering, what is your plan for smaller businesses? How does this, in your view, affect mom and pop businesses who are just struggling to keep their doors open, keep workers on the payroll right now?
Well, they shouldn't be doing it by paying people low wages. We don't want low-wage businesses.
You're being carefully taught right now, and so are your children, not to be an entrepreneur. You are being run out of town with your business, and the big corporations are making money, and the big banks are making money. What he just said there is true. We don't want you, little man. We're going to stomp on your head. They loathe the small business. They hate everything about people like that. They see us as one thing, consumers and workers. That's it. As this begins to escalate, you watch, they will destroy. They'll hold press conferences publicly shaming and bragging about the companies that are forced out of business due to non-compliance. It'll look like battle damage assessment from the Pentagon War Update. We destroyed this business, and who knows, we might get this business next. The Obama administration was fully on board. And is there any question now why Trump pulled us out of the Paris Accords? You don't mess with people's money, but that's exactly what the global elites began plotting back in 2015. Look, I don't have time tonight, but I'm going to get into this. This all makes sense if you start to realize that they all know this system is out of control. They all know this is going to collapse. And so they're preparing. They're the elites. They've got trillions of dollars at stake. What are they going to do? Well, they got to choke anybody who stands against them, choke them off at the source. So a side meeting was conducted at Paris between the world's leading financial institutions. 2 organizations took the lead to setting the framework to fundamentally alter global finance. It was the World Bank and the UN, and together they outlined what is now called the United Nations Environment Program Finance Initiative. They brought together over 230 banks and insurance companies to draft a methodology that would bend the private sector to the will of the government by using banks as a pressure or choke point. I want to show you a really disturbing graphic because you're really not in it. This graphic from their own report shows exactly what they're trying to do. They plan on completely turning off the money involved in what they call high carbon economy. But remember, it's not just high carbon. I will show you in subsequent shows that this is not just green, this is social justice as well. It's full compliance or you're canceled. The graphic shows what they have to gain here. All the dividends go to the investors. Think firms like BlackRock, who I've told you about in other shows, who have pledged only to invest in companies that are making this transition. They then direct funds to banks that bend the knee, who give in to the green and social companies. Then all of those profits that they've given to those companies go back to the top, to the ones who are pushing this whole damn thing. You're never there. It's all about the money and controlling it before anyone else gets a sliver of it. This is why they have to push going green now before the technology is even ready for it, because the system is collapsing. Control, control, control. And this is the methodology that they all worked up in 2015. Who needs a carbon credit system when the banks and the corporations can get rich off of this system, where before they were going to have to pay for it? The first thing they have to do is align. You align what the bank wants towards what the governments were about to write policy on. And it was a four-step process. The first thing, it was measure. They had to come up with a system that rated both banks and companies on their risk to the climate. I'll come back to this in a second, but it sounds an awful lot like a climate credit score. Then setting targets. Once a business or a person has been weighed and measured, they then show you what you need to improve on to stay in business. Then reorienting or steering. This is where the money is either refocused or halted altogether if you decide you're not going to do that. Again, I'll show you a little later on in the show, but those who don't toe the line will be victim to what they call exclusion measures. Kind of a word I like to stay away from, seeing that it was an exclusion order that got rid of all those pesky Japanese in 41. Then you get to tracking progress. This is where they make sure that you stay in line once you're firmly under their boot. Forget for a second the fact that bankers seem to be making decisions that run counter to your business model and their business model. Their business model is to make money, right? How is any of this legal? Well, their own graphic from their own reports clearly showed the entire reason for this is to reap the financial benefits. There's a whole lot of cash out there. This is the biggest robbery in all of human history. It is going to happen to the left and to the right. It's going to happen to every citizen, not just in America, but the entire globe. Surely governments, especially ours, would cry foul here. Again, from their own reporting, they openly brag about collusion between banks and governments. They even list a U.S. investor group that met regularly with members of Congress in communications with Obama. Now, I wonder if any of those members of Congress were from the GOP. I think they're equal opportunity offenders. I also wonder how many members of Congress began reorienting their portfolios to some of these green investment firms and green companies once they got word on what was coming. As I said earlier, this is an over $1.5 trillion a year business. Europe was clearly fully on board at the expense of their own people. But to do this for real, you have to have the world's largest economy in the world. If you think this couldn't happen in the United States, hang on. I'll show it to you next. All right, I want to tell you a little bit about rough greens. My dog Uno, when he tried it for the first time, I really didn't think that he would even eat it, because he doesn't eat anything. He literally, you'd have to hand feed him sometimes. And if you did, or if you were just there and he was deciding to eat from the bowl, you had to freeze, because the minute you moved, he'd look up at you, he'd lose interest, and then it was done. Let me tell you, this is, I don't know what's in rough greens. I mean, I do, vitamins, minerals, and probiotics, but I don't know what they do to make it taste good to dogs. They love it. Now, if your dog will eat it, you will see a huge difference in your dog. But not every dog will eat it. So that's why Dr. Dennis Black, he's the creator of rough greens, he's decided you shouldn't pay for that. If it doesn't work for your dog, it doesn't work, and you shouldn't have to pay for that. So he's giving you a free bag of rough greens for your dog to try out. All you do is pay shipping. Just go to roughgreens.com/Beck or call 833-GLEN-33, 833-GLEN-33. Get a free bag of Rough Greens. Try it with your dog now. And in a couple of months, you will see a huge difference. All right, scrolling back through that list of banks that were full-on partners with the UN and Paris Accords, you don't see too many American banks. Certainly not any big names. Can you imagine the uproar, both from within the government and with people and businesses during the Trump administration, if they knew that banks, say like Bank of America or Chase Manhattan, were taking their marching orders from climate activists at the UN? Would you maybe consider refinancing your home with somebody outside of that ridiculousness? Because I would. I'd go down right now and say, I want my money out of your bank. Well, I assume that's what they were worried about. None of these banks really catch an eye at all. But this one caught mine. The Amalgamated Bank. It was one of the few U.S. institutions that was an original signatory. It's also the largest owned union bank in the country. This is why it caught our eye. They're owned by Workers United, which is an affiliate of SEIU. Oh, I've got a long history with them. I mentioned earlier in the show that the World Bank and UN were collaborating at global levels back in 2015, and U.S. financial institutions were basically a no-show. But the banking group in the Netherlands took their methodology and created a private organization. Because the UN and Paris Accords would be too risky. They called this the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, or PCAF. In 2018, the Amalgamated Bank took their private model based on the UN Paris Accord initiative and led the charge to begin implementation here in America. You remember the graphic I showed you earlier from someone that showed us their ESG score from Merrill Lynch? If and when you start receiving these, you'll notice how they allocate these scores. To put it mildly, it's a little vague. And remember, this is only for the E part of the equation of ESG. So the E, a quick representation for how they're going to start grading you just on the E, comes directly from a PCAF report on the entire system. Here's how you're going to be graded. You're going to be graded, your risk assessed based on the things and services you buy. Gee, that would be a service would be one of our, the Blaze, and you could get, Please subscribe to the Blaze. Sincerely, please subscribe to the Blaze right now. BlazeTV.com/Glenn, promo code Glenn. Next thing you're going to be graded on, how much electricity you use. If you own a business, how much travel is involved? How much do your employees commute? How many buildings do you own? How many company vehicles are there? What do you invest in? On and on. If you score too high, you will then be deemed high risk and given a low rating. And if you think anyone will be excluded from this, look at what will be affected. Again, from their own disclosures, personal mortgages, commercial real estate, business loans, listed equity, energy finance, car loans, every single aspect of your financial life and future. Remember, I had Bill Gates. I put him up on the board yesterday. He's a small little piece of this in some ways. Last week, we were showing what he was doing with farming. He owns all this farmland. Well, he just came out and said Americans, for global warming, must stop eating all meat. I guarantee you that will be on the score eventually. How much meat do you eat? Well, you're not going to get government bailouts. You're not going to get loans from banks. You're not going to get welfare. You're not going to get health care unless you have a high score. They will control everything. Thank God this hasn't hit the financial market, the mainstream institutions yet, right? No. U.S. banks were a no-show at the UN, at the Paris Accords. But let's see who shows up on the private PCAF group. Let's look. Oh, there they are. Bank of America, Citi, Co-America, Morgan Stanley. And these are just the banks who have come out publicly right now. Remember, the Federal Reserve issues the bailout funds. They've been getting it because they were too big to fail. The Fed, not a government institution, The Fed is giving the bailout funds to the big banks. Well, who's the Fed? We don't know, but we're pretty sure that the 5 biggest banks, which would be JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and Bankrupt or Goldman Sachs. They're getting all this money. And what are they doing? The Fed is buying assets. What they're doing with the money is they're buying assets. The banks are buying assets, basically the stock market. Where does that money go? To the giant corporations. Look, they did all of this to avoid the UN and Paris Accord public list and avoid scrutiny, I'm guessing. It doesn't matter why they did it. It's just that they did do it. Pissed off yet about your climate footprint? Will soon be given a credit score to measure your financial risk? Yeah, it's insane. It was set for an initial test run by 2019 here in America, and it happened. Bank of America has already gone public that they're adopting this radical new reinvention of the financial system. This is the way that the government under Joe Biden will force corporations, big corporations, into bed. Anyone who doesn't comply, they will be crushed, as will their smaller competitors. And they will do it all by applying pressure through the banks that you and I have trusted with our life savings. If you haven't already been given your new climate credit score, you probably will soon. But remember, it has no teeth to it yet. It's still coming. In 2019 and 2020, there were test runs, but the beta is now over. So what's happening now? Back in a minute. So let me tell you, you don't keep a body like this without working extraordinarily hard. I mean, my suit coat is just almost falling off of me. As soon as this button snaps, it will fall off of me. That's because I just don't exercise at all. I don't do what I'm supposed to do. But I do eat Built Bar. It's healthier than your favorite protein bar. Bars are low calorie, low sugar, high protein, high fiber. They're great for a keto diet. You can lose or maintain weight while you're indulging on something that's made with real chocolate. It has 110 to 160 calories, 16 to 20 grams of protein, 3 to 5 net carbs. It definitely is the healthiest thing I will do all day. Eat a Built Bar. They're really, really good. My wife and Stu's wife, they're all fitness freaks, and they got into it, and I didn't listen for a long time, and I was really missing out. They're good. I asked this company to advertise on these shows because I believe in them. They are really good. Try it. Built Bar. They've reset the promo code. All you have to do is go to BuiltBar.com. BuiltBar.com. Use the promo code BECK. Get 20% off your next order. Promo code BECK at 20% off. BuiltBar.com. I cannot stress enough that everything I've talked about tonight isn't something that might happen. It is already here. Every single day I come into work, I see another financial institution announcing a requirement of the disclosure by their companies of their climate risks. Last week, the acting chairwoman of the SEC signaled that companies will soon have to report their climate risk to the government. Now, you might blow this off as no big deal, but it is big. This is the public-private partnership between the banks and the U.S. government in action. And this is not just a U.S. thing. If you fail to disclose your climate information to the bank, the government will compel you to do it anyway. If you're a business owner, you should absolutely be paying a lot of attention to this. I showed you earlier all the factors to consider when determining your climate risk. It covers literally everything, every business. They roll it up into some crazy climate equation and boom, they determine whether you sink or swim. And I'm not joking about the crazy equation. Look at it. I don't even think Goodwill Hunting could figure this equation out. But the big bank squeeze was conceived of in 2013 during the Obama administration with Operation Choke Point. It was then expanded on a global level in the Paris Climate Accords in 2015. Then, again, it was brought to the United States in 2018. It was put through a beta phase during 2019 and 2020, and testing is now over. A lot of changes are going to happen this year. Capitalism is over with this. The fundamental transformation is here. And we have missed it. The leaders of the 450 banks met in Paris 4 months ago to announce their all-in commitment to pushing forward. Remember that quote I showed you at the top of the show? We will promote social justice policies, reduce inequalities, including through support to tax, redistributive, and domestic resource optimization approaches, social safety nets, and/or insurance schemes. That was from this gathering in Paris. But I really want you to see the opening line. Now remember, these are bankers that wrote this. We, public development banks of the world, gather for the first time in Paris to commit to support the transformation of the global economy and societies. This is going to make the changes in the world that have been brought upon by COVID like nothing. Nothing. Do you see why I said at the beginning of the program, the news of the day is a distraction? I have a really hard time going through the news of the day every day because this is the most important thing. No one is talking about this. No one. We're doing research now. We've got, I think, 5 or 6 people just doing research on this every day. And the understanding of it is growing larger and larger. A month after that meeting, the UN Finance Initiative met in December and published this report. These are the preliminary results from 2 years of testing, what we're all about to see, launched this year. They called it a pilot program that went into effect in 2019. These are the banks that were involved. Again, you'll hardly notice any U.S. banks listed outside of the labor union, SEIU Amalgamated Bank, but they brought the framework to the U.S. through a private entity. We can assume that the same timeline is being followed over here, which matches up with the moves from Bank of America and most recently, this statement from Citibank. There are no punches pulled in this report. They make it very clear what's about to happen. Quote, achieving net zero emissions will require a whole economy transition. Every company, every bank, every insurer, and every investor will have to adjust their business models. Multiple case studies were published spanning the last 2 years. This bank in France laid out what they called Climate Vulnerability Index. That's your climate credit score. Check this out, quote, the approach aims to assess transition risks by quantifying the marginal impact of the climate scenario on the credit rating of borrowers for a set of priority sectors under the assumption that the borrower does not adapt to this scenario. So bend the knee or you don't get credit. So let's say you do put your foot down. Let's say that I, as a business owner, say to hell with that. I'm not doing this. What happens? Well, in Section 4 of the report, it makes it clear. Anyone caught out of compliance and unwilling to conform will be dealt with through what they call exclusion policies. This Belgian bank announced a complete shutoff of financing to include insurance for all coal-related products, as well as energy companies that use coal. This is going to happen with guns. All of this is being copied by the private bank organizations here in the U.S. The bank that brought the framework to America stated last year 90% of their operations have been brought under this revamped financial system. 90%. And if you think, oh, I don't own a business, is not going to change anything, the areas, again, listed that are affected, residential mortgage, commercial real estate, business lending, project financing, as well as auto loans. So whether you're buying a car or a house or starting a small business or investing in the stock market, remember, you put money in your 401k. If that 401k isn't aligned with the social justice and environmental governmental rules, you're going to get a low credit score. So you're no longer investing in the company you believe in, but the company that the banks tell you are socially and ecologically correct. Everything is going to be touched by this. They've covered all the bases to use finance to force a public-private oligarchy. The UN Finance Initiative even lists partnerships with insurance companies. Just imagine how badly that will be abused. And if they can't get you as a climate risk, don't worry. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about the other side, the social issues section. These are obviously more vague. No crazy equations to help them quantify how equitable you are. But they aim to, quote, clarify how human rights and wider societal issues relate to the activities of finance institutions. Whatever the hell that's supposed to mean, believe me, it's probably not going to be next week. It's going to be a while before we even get to this side of the board. Personally, I think President Trump knew what was coming, and I believe that because he ordered the OCC to require large banks to provide fair access to bank services, capital, and credit no matter what. The rule went into effect the week before he left office. It also puts entirely new context when Joe Biden, 1 week after he became president, put that rule out into the cold. This is the entire strategy of the financial system to take control. But remember, this is only one piece. It's a big piece, but only one piece. They've already chosen who will survive and who won't. If you want to know who will win these Hunger Games, if it continues, it'll be two classes, the government and the corporate elites, the Coca-Colas, the Walmart, big tech. If your balance sheet shows profits in the tens of hundreds of millions and you're willing to say or do whatever they say to do, you're fine. If not, remember what this Democrat said?
We don't want low-wage businesses.
They don't want you. They don't like you. You're collateral damage in the war of the New World Order. Total oligarchical control is the end game here. Climate change, COVID, critical race theory. They're just levers to get what they ultimately want. Banks and financing will be one of their biggest pressure points. They're becoming the police and punisher, really. All of this is connected. And we've gone from talking and theory to action. Back in a minute. We can win, but we have to be smart, and we have to help others become informed. And this is a hard one to inform people on. It's hard to break down. Join me tomorrow morning on my radio program on BlazeTV or national radio tomorrow beginning 9 a.m. Eastern. From Dallas, good night.